Alright, so for this case study, I did 8.2, Favia versus Indian University of Pennsylvania, IUP, as I will be calling it in the near future. Alright, so this is a class action lawsuit. The women are the plaintiff, which would be women of the gymnastics and the field hockey team. And then the defendant would be IUP. They're in a collegiate program, and the school president, Dr. Petit, and the director of athletics. That is going to be who the defendants are. Alright, so summary of this case. The two teams, gymnastics and field hockey, were cut, and they don't want any more teams to be cut, is what the women want at the school. They're using Title IX to say more male scholarships are being awarded, and that basically by cutting these two women's teams, and all the statistics I'll read here in a minute are breaking the rules of Title IX. IUP is a federally funded school, and that way it is subjected to Title IX and all its rules. At the time of the cutting the two teams, IUP was approximately 55% women. That does not include the percentage of women athletes, though. Keep that in mind. In 1991, budget cuts were directed to the athletic department and also to the school, but the athletic department received a substantial budget cut of $350,000. And if you know anything about athletic departments, that is a lot of money to be cut from an athletic department. All right, so the one thing they don't want you to read about real quickly in the intro is that not only were two women's teams cut, but two men's teams were cut as well. The two women's teams that were cut were, again, the gymnastics and field hockey. And the two men's teams that were cut were the soccer team and the tennis team. The athletic director did make a promise that a women's soccer team would be elevated from a co-ed level or a non-NCAA sport to an actual varsity sport in the NCAA division. Alright, so women to male athletes isn't similar to the percentage of just regular students. The percentage of women to male athletes is substantially lower. 14 other schools in this area, though, I would like to point out, do have women's field hockey, and 7 other schools do have women's gymnastics. Alright, so my problem with this here is that both two teams were cut. So just because we are women, I do feel like sometimes we are discriminated against, but sometimes we do seek for way too much equality. Part of this that I read in here was saying that, if I can find it here. Alright, so part of this in here is saying that the men's teams get way more funding, and they also get more scholarships. Well, if we think about this in the terms of men's sports to women's sports have a football team. Men's sports have a baseball team. Women's sports, we do have a softball team, we have volleyball, we have basketball. Everything's pretty even along those playing fields. There are still 7 teams at each one of the men's and women's teams at this college. So they cut two equally, looking to reinstate the women's soccer team into a varsity sport, which would make the sports 8-7 if that is reinstated as a varsity sport. My problem is that men's sports are going to bring in more revenue, point blank, no matter what school you're at. You could be at a small D3, you could be at an NAIA school. Men's sports will bring in more revenue. So the fact that men's sports do receive a few more scholarships than women's sports, you have to think about the numbers here. Men's football is going to have more scholarships awarded than a women's gymnastics team or a women's field hockey team. It's just how it's going to work. You bring in more athletes, you have to. For that football team to be eligible to play, you have to have those people there. And the fact is that in this, it is argued a bunch of times that women are treated unfairly at this school. But like I said, looking at this, it does say here that the school is working with the people to help them transfer, to help them something to another school. Well, just because this school did have a budget cut of $350,000, they tried to keep it equal. They tried to get rid of two teams that weren't super profitable for weren't super profitable for that school. The women's gymnastics teams, they weren't competing in any NCAA tournaments. There wasn't a huge drive at that time, and the decrease of women's gymnastics players were going down. So they probably did look at all the sports teams of the women that were at that school and try to think of, no matter how much they didn't want to do this, they had to because of budget cuts, that they were discriminating against the women because they went for the two teams that weren't the most popular or weren't having the most income or weren't having the most draw towards scholarships to people that wanted to come to that school for women's gymnastics or for women's field hockey. Whereas men's soccer and men's tennis probably didn't bring in the revenue that a men's football team, women's volleyball, men's basketball would bring in for that school. My problem with this is I do think these women have a slight point. I do think these women do deserve to have the soccer team, as promised, made into a varsity sport. 100% I agree with that. But I also do think the women are fishing also for a sympathy card. I think the women are fishing for, you cut our two teams. Well, we cut two of the men's teams as well. So if we would have cut 3 men's teams to 1 women's team, you would have been hearing the same thing from men about this, but they wouldn't have played the women's rights card. And I know I'm a woman, so I know I probably should be all for this, but I do think, I don't know, I do think they're kind of begging for a way out with this. And I mean, looking at all the stats, right here it says in 1991 to 92, 30% of all athletes were female and 63% were male. With the elimination of 2 women's teams, the percentage of women athletes dropped to 36, and the men's increased to 64. Well, all right, so the women's athletes dropped. It dropped to 36%, and the men's rose. Well, that could just mean that the men's team had more walk-on athletes to the basketball or football team. And that also means the women's team, just because they cut 2 men's teams, does not mean that the men's is going to increase as well. There are almost 60 to 70 male athletes on a football team, where on a women's gymnastics teams, 12, 13 athletes, and then on a women's field hockey team, 20 tops. So it's going to happen. I understand that it decreased, but that still doesn't decrease your school enrollment. It still doesn't decrease the percentage of women students who choose not to be student athletes that participate in sports at that school. So in terms of student scholarships, the women also fall behind the men. In 1991, the university awarded $314,000 in scholarships. Of this amount, $246,000 went to men and only $67,000 went to women. Or 21% went to women and 79% went to men. Now, I do disagree with this a little bit. I do disagree with this because they could at least have it in the realm of where 67,000 was rounded up to 100,000 and lower the 200,000 down by 46,000 to match that 100,000 to 200,000 and equal it out that way. And I'm not going to say it's going to be equal because it won't. Because there's not going to be ever an equal amount of women athlete at a school compared to men's athlete. It's never going to happen. You can look at pro athletes. You can look at anything on TV. We do not watch women athletes, which isn't fair. I do agree. We don't watch them play sports on TV. And we watch men play sports on TV. It's just how America is. And I know it's not right. And I know nobody's going to agree with me probably. It's fine. I have my own opinion. But on here, they did side with the women. They did side, so good for the court. They did side with the women that it was being unfairly treated. And yes, if you do look at all this stuff, I do agree. But I do think as women, we need to stop begging for a way out. And we need to put our foot down and we need to actually go out and get it. So maybe they should be, instead of arguing about scholarships and everything like this, they should be protesting that that school sport, the soccer team that he promised, hasn't been reinstated. I think that's what they should go after first. Once they get that, then good. You go for it. You're already one up on the men's. If you already have 8 teams, the men's only have 7. So you're already one up. You may not be one up on scholarships. You may not be one up on how many percentage of women athletes there are. But also, you do win in the state in the fact that there are 8 women's teams and 7 men's teams. So my opinion to those girls who are at that school, if you're looking for in-state tuition, there are 14 other schools that you can transfer to besides Indiana Pennsylvania University. 14 other schools with field hockey teams that are Division I. That doesn't include the Division II, Division III, and NAIA schools that may be in your area for field hockey. Also, there are 7 other schools with gymnastics teams that are in that area. So if you're worried about out-of-state tuition, don't go out of state, stay in state and transfer. Your credits will transfer. It may not be convenient, but if you are that dead set on playing your sport, like I would be, volleyball player, I'm an athlete, I would be pissed if my sport was cut, but I'm not going to let that keep me from playing. I'm going to transfer. I'm going to go to a school where I'll be valued and leave that school. Not all fights can be won in that brief amount of time that these ladies saw these teams cut and wanted to make a change just like that by reinstating soccer or reinstating the field hockey and gymnastics teams. If these women are that emotionally, and here it says that, where was this? What it said? Hold on. So on here, the opportunity to compete in undergraduate interscholastic athletics vanishes quickly, but the benefits do not. We believe that harm emanating from lost opportunities for the plaintiffs is likely to be irreparable. Okay, so that means you're going to stereotype girls as being irreparable for losing their sport when they can solely transfer and not have any of the damage. So maybe you lose a few friends along the way, but why would you lose your friends? Just stay in contact with them. If you absolutely love the school, then I see where your problem is. But my bet is that you're not emotionally attached to IPU. My bet is that you're pissed off they cut your sports team, and that you're pissed off at the school because they're discriminating against women whenever they cut 2 men's team as well. Keep that in mind. What do you think those guys did? I bet they went home, had a few drinks, got really pissed off, looked for a different school to go to, and transferred. Or if they're on the soccer team, maybe he was a kicker, joined the football team. So maybe that's the increase in men's sports. They cut it, but he joined the soccer team, or the football team. So you got to look at it in different ways. And I do agree that sometimes women are discriminated against, and we are treated unfairly. But at the end of the day, me personally as a woman, I'm not going to sit back and be emotionally distraught about it, what it says here. We do not believe that defendants will be irreparably harmed if the women's and field hockey and gymnastics teams are reinstated. So you don't harm them. You want to reinstate their teams when they could just transfer? Like, then you're not thinking about the fairness to men too, though. I mean, you can say it's just women, but you're really not thinking about the fairness for men if you reinstate 2 more women's teams and get rid of and keep the men's teams gone. So then women go up by 3 sports if you put the soccer team in there and get rid of the men's teams. I just don't think it's fair. So that is my opinion on this. Like I said, the women won, so I guess my opinion doesn't really matter. But again, that is my opinion, and that is what I think is the women are doing. I think they're looking for a cop-out instead of doing the things that actually need to be done so women don't look like we have to play the pity game.